أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وأصحابه وأزواجه وأتباعه أجمعين وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. Um, I had sort of the honor of giving a presentation to you all today. Um, and I kind of had this topic in mind before the verse was chosen that if you've seen the flyer, it was رَبَّنَا أَنزِلْ عَلَيْنَا مَائِدَةً مِنَ السَّمَاءِ. So, O our sustainer, send down upon us a table from the heavens. So it just, I guess there are no coincidences, but this is something I've had in my mind for a while. And I wanted just to share with you all my thoughts on this. And inshallah, you guys find this interesting. And in terms of questions, I guess, if anyone does have questions during the presentation, if I can address them then, like in a short period, I will. Otherwise, we'll try to keep it to the end because this presentation, I think, may be a bit long. And I tried to pack a lot in there, but we'll see as it goes. So without further ado, let's begin. So the title of this topic is "The Fig, Olive, and I," and it's in regards to quite arguably one of the most famous chapters in the Quran, and that I'm sure many of you know and recite very frequently. And I've always kind of been struck by this chapter for a long time, primarily because, and I guess in sort of Quranic eloquence, it goes from one matter to another to another. It's as if it's almost sort of jumping. And I never, honestly quite understood why, specific things were used, at least specifically in this chapter, why fig, olive, Mount Sinai, secure city were used in such sequential order. And I think maybe for the past year or so, year and a half, I've been thinking about it. And these are just some thoughts that were sort of inspired to me, came to me, wanted to share with you all. And it stems from my sort of understanding, personal understanding of the Quranic speech, in that, and I'm sure many of you all know, to me, I take the Quran as a sort of speech to me specifically, being addressed to me, and not just being addressed, but being addressed in a very personal manner. So who I am as a human being, what is my place in the universe? What am I doing here? How am I to make a sense of all the things that are happening within me and around me? And that's kind of how I took this chapter. So it's a very personalized view of the chapter, and that's why I call it the fig, olive, and I. And just to go through the verses, and we'll go through them individually pretty soon, inshallah. But Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Watteen wa Zaytun, by the fig and by the olive, wa Tu'ri Sinin, and by Mount Sinai, wa Hadha al-Balad al-Amin, and by this secure city. لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ. Verily, we have created man in the best of form. ثُمَّ رَدَدْنَاهُ أَسْفَلَ سَافِلِينَ. Then we have returned him to the lowest of the low. إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ فَلَهُمْ أَجْرٌ غَيْرُ مَمْنُونٍ. Except those who believe and do righteous deeds, for they will have a reward uninterrupted. فَمَا يُكَذِّبُكَ بَعْدُ بِالدِّينِ. Then what makes you deny after this judgment? أَلَيْسَ اللَّهُ بِأَحْكَمِ الْحَاكِمِينَ. Is not God the most just of judges? So this is chapter 95 of the Quran, the 8 verses that we will go through, inshallah. So two things I wanted to outline first before we sort of delve into it. And I put wow, the letter wow in the Quran is a particle, sort of as a conjunction. and it, to me at least, means many things. And I say, what is the significance of one letter? Because as if you go back to the verses, you will see in the first several verses, wetin, wazaytun. So again, right, for the fig and the olive. Waturi sinin, and by Mount Sinai. And then wahada al-balad al-amin, again, and by the secure city. So what is the significance of the wa here? And then it also uses thumma later, and then illa. But with respect to wa, what is the importance of that? That's connecting the fig, olive, Mount Sinai, and the secure city altogether. What does that mean? And I'm sure, many of you are familiar, but, quite often when I was growing up, it was, what I was told was, oh, this wa means just, oh, God is swearing by these things in the Quran. I mean, I just kind of took it because it sort of made sense. Somebody else was telling me that, so I thought, okay, seems reasonable. But truthfully, I never understood what is the significance of that. What does that even mean? And I think it has a very important factor here, as I'll share with you. So to take some points from Nursi, this is from the 29th letter, second point. And what he says is that Almighty God swears by many things in the Quran. The Quranic oaths contain numerous mysteries and significant points. For example, the oath in by the sun and its splendor, chapter 91, verse 1, forms the basis of the splendid comparison in the 11th word. It depicts the universe as a palace and a city. The oath of Yasin by the Quran, full of wisdom, chapter 36, verse 1 and 2, calls attention to the sacredness of the Quran's miraculousness and indicates that it is so worthy of veneration it can be sworn by. The oaths in by the star when it goes down, chapter 53, verse 1. And furthermore, I call to witness the setting of the stars, and that is indeed a mighty adjuration if you but knew. Chapter 56, verse 75 and 76, indicate that falling stars are a sign that jinns and devils have been prevented from receiving news from the unseen, so that they cannot cause doubts about revelation. Now, I'm not going to go specifically into like sort of each verse that he's mentioning here, but I think the point I draw from this is that by doing, in the case of, frequently the use of wa, or there's an indication happening. It's not simply just, swearing by something, but it means something. It indicates something beyond itself. There's a significance that thing holds with respect to the thing that's being addressed. So, for example, going back to the chapter here, وَالتِّينِ وَزَيْتُونَ وَطُورِ سِينِينَ وَهَذَا الْبَلَدِ الْأَمِينَ. There's a significance to the fig, the olive, Mount Sinai, and the secure city. What is that significance? That's the question, as it relates to me. What is the relevance or significance of those things? He also goes on to say, they also point to the vast power and perfect wisdom in the awesomely vast stars being set in their places in perfect order, and the planets being made to revolve in wondrous manner. Again, he's saying it's indicative. They point to the vast power and perfect wisdom of the stars and planets. With the oaths by the winds that scatter and broadcast, chapter 51, verse 1, and by the winds that set forth, chapter 71, verse 1. It attracts attention to the angels appointed to the winds in order to call to mind the significant instances of wisdom in the disposal of the air and its movement in waves. So notice here he's mentioning it attracts attention, which I think is another important point. So it draws the consideration of man, is a very important point. It's indicative, as he mentions. And they point, therefore, to something beyond themselves. That, to me, is what, I gather from what he's saying here. For the elements which are supposed to be governed by chance perform important duties for most subtle purposes, and so on. All the oaths and their positions contain different points and different purposes. So as I took from it and thinking about it, I broke it up into three things. This is in by no means a sort of summative explanation of, let's say, the letter waw in the Quran, the conjunction, the particle, but it's what I took from his writing and also what I took from the chapter, what it means to me. Interrogative, as he mentions, it attracts your attention. So it's questioning, making you question something or drawing your consideration. It's implicit in that it's sort of elucidating something of which it points to, implied necessity. It's pointing to something. Indicative, pointing to something beyond itself, and specifically with respect to the Quran, pointing back to its source, and with respect to the source, a certain quality, maybe, as he says, power and wisdom, as we were reading. So these are three things I took from what he wrote, and then what I took from this chapter specifically. I don't know if anybody has any sort of brief questions about just this first point before we go on. Otherwise, we can answer them at the end. Okay. Now, the other important aspect was, to me, in what context should I be reading this? And well, I sort of already alluded to this already, but when I'm reading it, am I reading it simply for the sake of the fig or the olive? Is that really the primary concern, those things in and of themselves? And I think it relates to what I just said earlier. The Quran, in the way in which it's structured, is showing you that in and of itself is not what is important, but what it means. First, using something out tangible in the tangible world, or maybe not even material, but immaterial, something that we can connect to. And to me, this is the very important aspect of the Quran, is that it gives you something to connect to that you can think about and question. So it gives you a fig, it gives you an olive, it gives you a mountain, it gives you a city. These are tangible things for individuals that they can think about and draw meaning from. That's quote unquote abstract in a sense, not impossible to understand, but it's not material, so to speak, or it's sort of, it goes beyond the thing itself. And to me, that's what is important here, is that I'm reading this chapter not for the things themselves, but what they mean to me. How do they relate to me? What do they signify within me? That's the question. And I add, and as I want to make mention here, to go back to what I originally said, I'm being addressed personally. And the second thing I want to add here, as I mentioned before, is that I am being sort of uncovered by the speech, so to speak. I'm being unveiled. Who I am as a human being is sort of being shown before me, presented before me to think about, to question. And I added this picture here of Peanuts Charlie Brown. Sometimes we think about, in the caption, there's this teacher off screen, just, speaking, and we're just kind of in one ear, out the other, not really paying attention. But in the Quran, there's the one who's speaking is speaking with a certain purpose, because he must be the one that gave me existence or made me who I am, as I am. So the question is, what is he telling me? What is he saying about me? And is that something that I can be certain about? So these are the two fundamental points I wanted to bring up before we begin or dive into the chapter. And then I'll add another thing from Nursi, 29th letter, second point. Here are his comments. I just want to present to you his comments about this chapter. He says, by swearing by the fig and the olive, Almighty God calls to mind the immensity of his power. So again, indicative. It points to something beyond itself, something beyond the fig and olive. Just like a painting points to something beyond the painting itself, the painter specifically, or the building points something beyond the building itself, the builder, and their respective qualities. All by swearing by the fig and the olive, Almighty God calls to mind the immensity of his power and the perfection of his mercy and his extensive bounties. So pointing to certain qualities of the maker of the fig and the olive. In order to redirect those people, so to draw attention, to grab their attention, who are heading for the lowest of the low, showing that they may progress spiritually through thanks, reflection, belief, and good works as far as the highest of the high. So these are Nursi's comments. And then he goes on to say, the reason for specifying the fig and the olive is that as fruits, they are most blessed and beneficial, and their creation compromises many notable things and bounties. For the olive is utilized for illumination and food. And I'm going to bring that up in sort of my sort of own personal assessment and understanding of the chapter, and is a basic commodity in social and commercial life. The fig is the same. It displays in its creation a miracle of power by encapsulating in its minuscule seed all the members of the huge fig tree. So I'm going to bring up the seed aspect when we talk about it. And it's a divine bounty, both in its being a food and its uses. And contrary to other foods, its continuity and many other advantages. It calls all this to mind with the oath and instructs me to draw lessons from them so as to believe and perform good works, and not to fall to the lowest of the low. So as he points out, using those things out in the world that I'm in touch with, experience, drawing me to something beyond themselves, specifically who I am as a person, what do I believe in, how do I see the world, and based on how I see the world, how do I view the world? That's my worldview, my belief. How do I act in accordance with that worldview? In other words, as he's pointing out, the truth is more than skin deep. And with the fig, you can see the inside, the seeds here. And then with the olive, the essence of an olive, if you squeeze it, you get olive oil. There's an oil there. Something beyond the skin itself that you can't, it's not apparent per se. Now I am going to go into the chapter. So to begin, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. The first verse, Wattini was zaytun, by the fig and by the olive. So when I thought about it, so the fig, as I looked, if you go back to the previous picture, Wattin, drawing the consideration of the innumerable qualities of man. So if you open up a fig, you will see so many seeds in there, too many to count. As I said, being personally addressed. So the fig, in a sense, is representative of me as a human being. I have innumerable human qualities. I can think, I can feel, I can act, I can reason, I can be happy or sad, laughing or crying. I can be angry, I can be in love, and as many as you can think of, to as many degrees as you can think of. So in a sense, what Teen is sort of pointing out is it's asking you to draw consideration to your qualities. Think about who you are as a human being and what's happening inside of you. Like, consider that. All of these faculties and senses you have, think about them. Have you thought about them? Because if you did think about them, you would realize those faculties are not something, they have nothing essentially to do with your material body in and of itself. Like, your material body isn't the one that's thinking, even though that's what materialist science will tell you. There's no thinking happening in the brain. Actually, nobody can actually show you thinking or feeling. It's not happening there. They can show you reactions, but they can't actually show you the qualities. Meaning, so what, in a sense, is saying you think about these qualities, they implicitly, therefore, point to something, not to the body in and of itself, but zaytun, the olive. And as I point out, the oil is like the essential nature of the olive. It's a liquid, elusive, so to speak. And drawing the consideration of man's essential nature, the spirit, which by which of which the qualities define it. Those qualities comprise the spirit, singularly and unifyingly. In other words, they make you you, and they all are there at once. Like there's no thinking here and feeling here. There's no dichotomy. Like you can't see a dichotomy in let's say in the sense of when you open up a fig, all the seeds are there. They're all there, and they're all part of the same fig. And therefore, like yourself, you have all of these qualities, faculties, senses that are all there, that point to your spirit, your essential nature, who you are as a human being, as a conscious human being. So, to me, this chapter fundamentally is pointing out, it's drawing your attention using the fig and the olive. Hey, consider these qualities in the most sort of eloquent, concise manner. To me, this is sort of Quranic eloquence, but drawing your attention and in a sense, as I mentioned before, the wa is it's interrogative and actually make you consider something. It's indicative as well. And what is it indicative of? Something beyond those things themselves, as I mentioned, both of which by the wow point to and are connected to their source. Because who is the one speaking here, and who is the one saying by the fig and the olive and by the olive? As Norsi says, by swearing by it, who's the one doing that? Who's the one demonstrating their sort of dominion over those things? That they're the ones that he must be the one that gave that thing existence, your qualities and your spirit at once. So, in a sense, I'm being addressed by my source through these individual qualities of mine, because they all point back to him, as the verse indicates. I'm a particular fig, I'm a particular olive. I mean, it sounds kind of sort of maybe a little bit ridiculous to say, but if you think about it, no two people are the same, no two olives are the same, no two figs are the same. And every one has their own sort of innumerable qualities of a human being to think about, to reflect on, and therefore their own spirit, essential nature. Now, I'm going to go on to the second verse. This is a picture of Mount Sinai, and I'll leave you to some people may be a certain fan of a certain author, but he writes, not all those who wander are lost. And I think this verse is, the way I've heard it understood, to me, has never been satisfactory. Because it, as I've mentioned, what is its relevance to me? Nothing to do with a mountain out there per se, but what does it have to do with me? And it relates to the first verse, as we'll soon see. Well, again, and by Mount Sinai. Now, here's what I, typically understood, maybe you all have as well at some point. The place where Moses, alayhi salam, peace be upon him, received the divine law. I mean, is that really what it means to me? Because who cares? And essentially, for me, like I'm not there. I'm not on Mount Sinai. I'm not receiving some divine law as he did. Or is it, do I proceed from divine power and will? So the first verse was pointing out your qualities, and therefore your spirit. Now it's saying, now, if you think about those things, you have to therefore think about where they're coming from. In other words, am I proceeding from divine power and will? So, as I say, Mount Sinai draws my attention to the source of my human qualities, the fig aspect, and the spirit, olive aspect, as him being their implicit consideration. Again, meaning they all must go back to him. I am simply a manifestation of his divine act, a particular manifestation. Just like a particular painting is a manifestation of the painter, a particular manifestation, because there can be innumerable paintings that painter could make. But I'm like one painting, one specific painting. Again, by the wow, I do not receive his command upon Mount Sinai. In other words, I am Mount Sinai. I am. So that's where they say the divine command was sort of revealed. But if you make it personal, you see that those qualities in your spirit are really just an issuance. They proceed forth from the divine command. Awesome says, how do you relate the olive to the spirit? Because if you go back to the picture, it's something beyond the skin. In other words, the oil, the essential nature of it. It's like the liquid aspect, ethereal, so to speak. So you have certain qualities. Well, if you think about those qualities, you realize, you think about it, they're not sort of independent qualities. I have thinking here, feeling here, reasoning here, but they all sort of point back to an essential core nature of the human being, which is his human spirit, his conscious, living human spirit. And the olive, not the olive itself, but what is beyond the olive, beyond its skin. You can make oil out of it. As Norshi says, it's for illumination. And that's what the spirit is. It's through the spirit, the conscious living spirit, is sort of the world illumined for you by using your human qualities. So man has qualities that specifically relate to his human spirit. And that's what I took away from the olive. And by Mount Sinai, knowing that my spirit and therefore my qualities are simply a direct issuance of the divine law, divine command. And I'll say what I'll reference in the 29th word, second aim, say, the spirit comes by command of my sustainer, chapter 17, verse 85. The spirit too is a conscious and living law, which has come from the world of the divine command, and which pre-eternal power has clothed with its external existence. In other words, I am being brought directly into existence by one that beyond the nature of the universe, a divine command. And that is to say, just as the unconscious laws which proceed from the divine attribute of will and the world of the divine command are always or mostly enduring, so it is even more definite that the spirit, which is a sort of brother to them and like them, is a manifestation of the attribute of will and comes from the world of the command, manifests immortality. It is also more worthy of it because it is existent, it has an external reality, it is more potent, more elevated because it possesses consciousness. It is also more enduring than them and more valuable because it is living. I'm not going to go, you can potentially talk about this as well, but what I really want to just take from this is that, I am simply a particular act, and I shouldn't say simply, but I am a particular act of the divine command. I am Mount Sinai. I am being brought into existence by him and him alone, with who I am as a human being, the spiritual aspect of it, my spirit, along with my human qualities. And Zafar says, I am reminded of the mountain raised above the people of Musa when a covenant was taken from them. So this mountain may be pointing to that covenant of mine. Yeah, I mean, as well. In that my spirit and my qualities if you look at them specifically, they have a covenant with their maker. And we'll get to that. In other words, they can only point back to him. They can only be directed towards him, not to anything else, because they're not, when you ask yourself about who you are as a human being, you realize that nothing in this world, not your body, not you yourself, nor anyone else, nor anything else in this world, can be responsible for who you are. That's the covenant. In other words, they all go back to him, and they're all in need of him as well. Why the fig and olive specifically? Why not any other fruit? So as I said, to me, why those two things are used. One, just generally speaking, these are things people interact with, but why not any other fruit? To me, it's not about the fruit in and of itself, but what they represent. So the fig specifically, its innumerable seeds on the inside direct me towards something. The olive directs me towards something. So what do they essentially mean? That's what I need to take from it. And that's why I think those things are used, because I can draw something about myself from those that is very obvious. Now, to the next verse, the Hajj within, and I'll get to sort of why I thought about this when reading this chapter. The Hajj pilgrimage, essentially. وَهَذَا الْبَلَدِ الْأَمِينَ. So, and by this secure city, another thing I always heard when growing up was that, this secure city, even though it's not used in the verse, but it's referring to Mecca, where the picture before I was showing you, where it's a painting of the Kaaba. But I always thought, well, you never actually see that word in there. You never see the word Kaaba in there. So, but why this secure city? Where is this secure city? What if I'm not there? What is this relevance to me? Again, where is this secure city? And then again, it says wa hadha al-balad, and by this secure city. What I realized is that this is something, again, that's personal, in that I am the secure city. My qualities as a human being, my spirit, and as Zafar said, maybe this covenant that which they have with their maker, or in other words, this, or also them being issued forth from a divine law. In other words, they are being given existence, must be given existence by one who must be absolute, beyond the nature of the universe. All of those qualities at once, as I am. That's what makes me secure. That makes me a secure city. So I wrote out, draws the consideration of man's innumerable qualities, fig, comprising the essential spirits, olive, being the direct issuance of the divine command, Mount Sinai, as being the sanctuary of belief, secure city. Mashal Haram, or the picture I just showed you, lies within. In other words, my qualities as a human being, and therefore my spirit, and those things therefore being the issuance of the divine command, or as Zafar said, I like that as well, having taken a covenant, because they all point back to him alone. They are the sanctuary of belief. That's what makes it a secure city. It's incorruptible, so to speak. If you really think about who you are as a human being, you realize you can't do anything but believe. You can't do anything but go back to him if you're really honest and sincere and reflective. The citadel, or the city, is like the innumerable qualities you have. There are so many things there, just like a city has. There are so many innumerable things that are sort of distinct and unique, and you have sort of very unique aspects to yourself as a human being. But they're secure in that no one can take away your humanity. And your humanity is sort of guaranteed in a sense, because they all go back to him. They all proceed from a divine source, an absolute source. In other words, your existence, it must be being guaranteed by him. And this is why who you are as a human being is secure. So long as you see yourself as being a human being, and knowing that your qualities are indicative of something else. Many people think zaytun is a guava, not olive. To me, all fruits from fig to olive are called to witness the spectrum of all fruits. Muhammad Ali, I agree. Possible, but like I said, this is what I took from it specifically. But people may have other thoughts about this as well. In other words, as I wrote out, for people who know, not Islam from outside, but Islam from within. So I don't need to necessarily go to this secure city, wherever this is. Maybe people say it's Mecca. Okay, but I mean, you could say it's just like any other city. It's made of stone and buildings and roads. Something more than that there. And thinking about it, as I said, I have to see myself and be reflective of myself to see that there are so many things happening within me. And are they sort of acting on their own? Or is it through the light of belief I see myself as being secured, my existence guaranteed, my qualities, and their, as I'll point out later, their need for eternity being guaranteed by Him, that I want to exist for eternity, that I don't want undying love or beauty, or I desire justice, or comfort. The only way those things are secure is only through belief, is only through recognizing what they mean, who they point to. So even my human qualities don't exist for their own sake, but they exist to go back to Him. Just like the fig and the olive. My spirit doesn't exist for its own sake, but to go back to Him, to be directed towards Him as a sort of signpost. Now, going on to the next verse, a very famous verse from this chapter, the artist at work. And this is sort of a rendering of Da Vinci's sort of, I guess, perfect man, so to speak. And this verse is very interesting because, I'm sure some of you have heard as well, but to me, quite often I heard it was always in sort of the material form it's speaking about. لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ. Verily, we have created man in the best form. But, as I pointed out, every verse is tied to the previous verse, right? Every word tied to the previous word. So if you go back to the last three verses, there was no really sort of mention. I didn't really make a mention directly or as saying that the body in and of itself is what is fundamentally the most important aspect of man. And as Norty points out, simply clothing, an external clothing to man's spirit and qualities. They're just simply the vehicle for man to sort of interact with this world. So what is it really saying as it relates to the last three verses? And I'm sure, people are catching on, quite obvious, in that what makes a man in the best form, him being the fig, the olive, or in other words, sort of the issuance of divine command to Mount Sinai, and therefore being the secure city, indicates that there is no better clothing and essence to house and employ one's innumerable qualities to develop and progress in knowing and communicate with Him, for He, one of absolute wisdom and justice, must have created us. I have, as the fig does, so many sort of seeds that need to be planted. So many qualities I have a human being. When I think about it, every day I go through sort of innumerable feelings that I have, innumerable thoughts cross my mind. All of those things, innumerable experiences I go through in life, they all sort of can be cultivated, like every seed in a fig, and they can all be developed, and progress can be made in sort of those qualities, in one sense, getting to know who made me in that way with those qualities. And as importantly, I would say, to be able to communicate with that one for whatever my needs are. For example, let's say I feel sort of, you know, sadness, maybe sadness about, potentially somebody, let's say, dying. That's a human quality, something not to be taken lightly. The question is, it's kind of amazing when you think about it, that you feel sad about maybe somebody else dying, or maybe your own imminent death. How is it that you're made in this way, this quality, to not desire non-existence, to desire permanence? And you're made in such a way that you desire eternity, and yet you don't have it there before you. It's not there. Where is this quality coming from? Where is its issuance from? And that, to me, is what's being said here, is that the quality that I have to desire eternity must be given by him, to cultivate that seed, to develop it, and therefore to know that, oh, he must be a permanent source of existence, and that he must be the only one that can give it to me, because he's the one that gave me that desire for eternity to begin with. So I need to take my need to him. I need to ask him, and not ask anything else in the universe. To me, this is the best form, that I have been given so many innumerable qualities to know him in so many different ways, that as a painting, I can know a painter in so many different ways, by the colors he uses, by the way he paints, by the things he's drawn or painted, the scenery, the background, what I'm doing. Likewise, all these qualities are seeds that can be planted and developed so as to know and communicate with him. That's what makes me a human being, and makes me in the best form possible. Not materially, because there are animals who may be able to see better than me. Not maybe, they are. Who run faster than me, definitely. Who are stronger than me, definitely. But that's not what makes me a human being then. It's sort of the immaterial aspect of it. And I'm going to emphasize justice here, because the verse at the end of the chapter talks about being just. And we'll get to that, why I think that's important. Nursi points out in the 33rd word, 15th window, who has created everything in the best way. Chapter 32, verse 7, everything is cut according to its innate abilities with perfect measure and order, and put together with the finest art, in the shortest way, the best form, the lightest manner, and most practical shape. Look at the clothes of birds, for example, and the easy way they ruffle up their feathers and continuously use them. All their things are given bodies and dressed in forms in a wise manner, with no waste and nothing in vain. They testify to their number, to the necessary existence of an all-wise baker, and point to that possessor of absolute power and knowledge. In other words, I'm given a form in which my body, so to speak, is able to be a vehicle of those qualities, but in the same vein is also a decaying vehicle, so to speak, as well. And we'll get to why that's important. And which draws my attention, my consideration, that I don't want the transience of my qualities as a human being. My ability to think, my ability to feel, my ability to see or smell or touch, any of those things one can think of. That, in a sense, is the best form. And this is a picture of Dante's Inferno, and hell resides within. And I'll get why I thought about this with this verse. ثُمَّ رَدَدْنَاهُ أَسْفَلَ سَافِلِينَ. Then we have returned him to the lowest of the low. So it seems contradictory that on one sense he can say, لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ. Certainly we have created man in the best of form. But on the other hand, say, we've turned him to the lowest of the low. What is going on here? This is a sort of contradiction I'm experiencing. But as I said, with the wow, even the thumma here, then, it's sort of, there's a connection between the best form and the lowest of the low. In other words, the only way in which I, as a human being, would not take myself as God, would not take myself as self-sufficient, is because I exist in a way in which that's not possible, if you think about it. That's the question here. What is implied, and where am I be directed to, and for what purpose? That in that contradiction, in that opposite, I'm being pointed to something else beyond myself. For example, if I was self-sufficient, I would have nothing to do with belief. I would think of myself as being self-sufficient and therefore God, my own sustainer. But that's not the best form. The best form, as I mentioned before, in order to know him, who he must be, and therefore communicate with him, to take my needs and wants, hopes and dreams and wishes to him, there would be no need. Just like a child who's dependent on their parents goes back to their parents. If the child was self-sufficient, they wouldn't need their parents. There would be no need, no two-way relationship there. And as I mentioned, for the best form must be, as I mentioned, it's a necessity, one in which the fig, the olive, or sort of, in other words, my qualities, my spirit, and therefore me coming as being a divine command, and therefore as a secure city, because I come from him, an absolute source, yearn for eternity through him by means of a clothing which lacks it. In other words, that's to say, my body, my transient and decaying body in this world, is not satisfactory to who I am as a human being, to what I want. That's the issue here. And that's why I'm in the best form possible. Because it's in that form that I get to know him, that my humanity is uncovered. Because as a human being, I'm not simply just a body. You know, as I mentioned, I emphasize again and again and again, I am my qualities. I am my spirit. I am, as Nursi says, I'm an issuance of the divine command directly. I'm being brought into existence as we speak. We created man in the best form, and we have returned into the lowest of the low in his absolute wisdom and justice. If you think about it, what is more wise or more just than that? If the essential innate purpose is to know who your Lord is and to connect to him, to direct yourself to him, there isn't. One can't think of anything else. Otherwise, we, as in, we as in, not we as in man, but we as in what the verse is referring to, the speaker, the sustainer, the creator of the whole universe. We, and therefore revelation would be meaningless. I would have no use for any of this stuff because I would have no issue, no contradiction, no question, no concern. There'd be nothing for me to answer. That's what makes me in the best form possible. As Zafar says, the best form is one that which can become the lowest of the low and the highest of the high. Yes. The highest of the high through belief. And we'll get to that as you think you brought that up. To the next verse. A circle with no beginning nor end is salvation. And I'll get to why, I bring this up. Why a circle? إِلَّا الَّذِينَ, as Zafar points out, إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ فَلَهُمْ أَجْرٌ غَيْرُ مَمْنُونَ. What is the highest of the high? Where it's the lowest of the low is this contradiction, this sort of apparent paradox. But in that contradiction does belief arise. Illa, it's connected. Best form, connected therefore to the lowest of the low, and therefore connected to belief. Because it's only through me being in the best form, in which I'm in the lowest of the low, this sort of paradox, this universal paradox. I'm in a universe where it doesn't satisfy me. It's a paradox. It's a contradiction. It's in that paradox that belief comes about. إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ فَلَهُمْ أَجْرٌ غَيْرُ مَمْنُونَ, except for those who believe and do righteous deeds, for they will have a reward uninterrupted, which is what I'm after. I don't want transient. I don't want the death of something, the death of pleasure, permanent pleasure. As I said, accept implies that there is always an option. And this is, again, from that contradiction, I have a choice to make now. There's an option presented for me. And only through that contradiction and the opposites can I have a choice. The choice to sort of believe or to deny, to see myself as a human being and what I refer to and who I am in need of, what my qualities as a fig, my spirit as an olive, me being Mount Sinai and therefore the secure city are in need of. Not in need of the world, but in need of him. And that arises from the contradiction and therefore my choice, which is my belief, how I see the world. And it is, as I said, the choice to believe that corresponds to man's best form. That's what makes man man. Not simply, his eyes or his nose or his tongue. Because, other animals have that too, maybe in a better way, quote unquote, so to speak. But the best form here, as the Quran is pointing out, is what you believe in. How do you see the world? That's what makes man in the best form, the highest of the high. And because he has form, it necessarily manifests in thought. What I believe in manifests in the thoughts, feelings, and actions I undertake in this world. So whatever I do, the question is, do I see that under the light of belief? Do I see what I'm thinking about or what I'm feeling as taking me back to him? My actions being a representation of belief. I am in need to thank my creator. Do I see my prayer, whether it's sort of my words or my physical action, as taking me back to him? That's what makes them righteous. That's what makes an amal, a work, a deed, righteous. It's how do I see it? It can be even something as simple as eating, breathing, drinking, sleeping, feeling, any of those things. They're all deeds, they're all actions, they're all things that happen in this world. But what makes them righteous is how do you see yourself? That's what puts you that's what makes you in the best form possible, or in the highest of the high. And by belief, or taking it back to their source, taking the painting back to the painter and saying, oh, what a wonderful painter, what a beautiful painter, what a very thoughtful and wise and knowledgeable painter. Then do I see those things being connected to a permanent source, an absolute source, one who must be absolute beyond the nature of this world, beyond space and time? That's the only way in which I have an undying sort of strength, an undying sort of connection, because it's with him. That is, as I say, closing the loop, a circle, incorruptible, beyond time. That's where salvation is, sort of realizing that all things must go back to him. That's closing the loop, that all things are provided by him and therefore must go back to him and are therefore guaranteed by him, their existence. I desire life, eternity. I've been given it. I must take it back to him, hand it over to him and say, oh, he's the only one that can give it to me, eternity, and all my qualities as well, to the number that are innumerable to count when I think about them. Circle, you can't corrupt a circle. There is no beginning or end. So how do you corrupt it? It's beyond time itself. The last two verses I'll end here quickly. I know there may be some questions. The perfect balance. So, as the verses point out, the last two verses, فَمَا يُكَذِّبُكَ بَعْدُ بِالدِّينِ, that what makes you deny after this judgment? أَلَيْسَ اللَّهُ بِأَحْكَمِ الْحَاكِمِينَ, is not God the most just of judges? In other words, how can one, going back to using the verse 7, what makes you deny after this judgment? When you think about yourself, as we've gone through the verses, how can you be okay with denial? It's not even it doesn't even correspond to who you are as a human being, to your innumerable qualities, to who you are, your spirit, which, when you think about it, your spirit doesn't age. Your body may age, but your spirit does not age. It doesn't age. You still desire, no matter how old you get, you still desire the perfection of your intellect, the perfection of your senses and your faculties. That doesn't age. Perfection doesn't age. There's no aging in perfection. In other words, the eternity of something. There's an aging of your body. So how can you, and through that contradiction, deny after that? That's the judgment. The judgment is not the judgment out there, but I am the judgment in the sense that I am made in such a way in which this must have been the best form to go back to him. That's the judgment. Because it was determined by him in his sort of absolute knowledge, power, wisdom, will to have made me in this way. How can you deny that? Because there is no contradiction there between me and what I want and who I am as a human being, between what the universe is and what it offers me. It doesn't offer me what I want. There's a perfect balance there in that contradiction. Everything I want and desire, which look towards eternity, the universe can offer me not even one iota, not even one atom's weight of it. So I have to go beyond the universe to find it. That's the judgment. And أَلَيْسَ اللَّهُ بِأَحْكَمِ الْحَاكِمِينَ, therefore is not God the most just of judges. In other words, what is more just as a human being than being a human being as you are? Nothing. Because what you desire is you are made perfectly in such a way to find it. Not in this world, but with him. It's only by man's choice that he sort of looks away from that judgment. So as I write out, being a secure city, the fig, olive, and Mount Sinai are not amenable to denial other than by man's choice. Man's judgment is that his form by which he is addressed are fashioned in a way only for eternity. This is the best judgment from one most just. Muhammad Said says, Joe says, our humanness does bring us closer to God. I agree with you. Yeah, our qualities as a human being, who we are as a human being, we just have to think about it. As Norsi says before that I read, I think thoughtful reflection, introspection, thankfulness, and appreciation is what's important here. Muhammad Said says, we usually take our admirations, the highest of the highs, located outside of us. But this verse pictures the human being as given the quality within him to be so. So we may say we are not made to be the lowest of low, but it is part of us or within our capacity to be so. Yeah, I agree with you in that our qualities do not accept denial. So we choose that specifically. What I meant by lowest of the low is that we're in this contradiction, this paradox, so to speak. And it's by our choice, by belief, is that we see ourselves going beyond this universe. That's why it says, إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ فَلَهُمْ أَجْرٌ غَيْرُ مَمْنُونٍ. Farah says, Sam, can you clarify the reasoning behind considering qualities to be separate from the spirit, i.e. fig qualities, olive equals spirit, is not the spirit, but the reflection of the qualities of its source? I 100% agree with you. So it's simply to say that the qualities point to the spirit. In other words, there's no distinction between the two, but it's showing that your qualities, they point to a spirit that you have. The spirit is comprised of qualities. There's no distinction between the two, but it's showing that you have a certain quality that points to your humanity. You think it's one aspect of the human being, points to your humanity. It makes you. That's your spirit, your conscious living spirit. You have ability to feel, a quality, points to you as a human being. It's all unified. There's no dichotomy in man. He has all of these things that are happening within him that makes him by his spirit. And they all together at once go back to that same source of existence. All those qualities go back to the same source of existence in the same way. In other words, all qualities take him, his unified being, back to the same source of existence. Can you address the statement hell is within Kareem says? So what I said by that is by my choice. If I deny by my choice, because in this sort of contradiction I'm presented with, my choice is what determines how I see myself. So I can make my own hell. If you think about it. So if you think about it, I make my own hell because of my choice. But when I connect to him, my choice is to connect to him. That's what paradise is my connection to an eternal source. It's a different, sorry, I guess maybe a separate discussion, but in a way, you don't really maybe make your own paradise, so to speak, but your paradise lies, your salvation lies with him. But hell is my choice because it's my disconnection from an eternal source. I did that. I severed the connection that was already there. I chose to ignore it or deny it. And with that, I was going to conclude my session. I know there was sort of a lot that I went over and tried to do that within a sort of, I guess, roughly a little over an hour, but I don't know. I was trying to answer questions along the way, and I don't know if Birkan, you want to leave it up to you how to, field questions, but I'm open to questions, comments, thoughts.
Well, Jazakallah khairan. Thank you for the great presentation. So according to schedule, and we started 10 minutes late, so you still have 25 minutes. So we can accept all questions. I guess that will be enough time to accept all questions. So I know people prefer writing on the comments, but we encourage people to speak. And Zafar, please go ahead.
Very beautiful presentation. Just wanted to say something about the word deen, which is typically understood as religion. Some people refer to the connotation of debt in the word deen. So what is being rejected? The verse says, how can you reject the deen? And based on the presentation of Suhail, the deen is predicated, established on the human nature. So what we cannot reject, according to the verse, is our very existence, the very existence of this universe and my position in it and my qualities in it. So the proof of the unrejectability of the deen lies in the existence. So I just wanted to point this out. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Yes, I had actually thought about that. I forgot to mention him, but yeah, Dean, and I can go back to the verse that you're referring to. Verse 7, فَمَا يُكَذِّبُكَ بَعْدُ بِالدِّينِ, that what makes you deny after this judgment. As I agree with you, people, I've heard, oh, it's about religion, but it's nothing external out there, but it's, as you said, predicated on your humanity, your sort of reflection about who you are as a human being. And you realize you cannot deny the judgment that's already within you. In other words, there is no, it's not something external out there that I need to sort of ascertain belief. No, it's already within me. The obvious nature of who I am as a human being is obvious to me because I'm a human being. And it's obvious what belief is because my own qualities necessarily take me back to my source. I just simply need to reflect on them. As this chapter points out, it's saying, as I mentioned, Nursi's points in the beginning, draw your consideration, attract attention. It's something that we have to reflect on, conscious reflection. Thank you, Joe. I appreciate it. I was sharing my thoughts, so hope some people took away some ideas from this that they can take with them. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts or comments. One thing I'll say is that I think, sort of after I thought about this chapter, I sort of realized that within the Quran, when things are mentioned, for example, like the fig or the olive or Mount Sinai, let's say in this chapter, or secure city, is that quite often, if not always, really, you can personalize really every verse in the Quran. It means something to you, what aspect of it attracts your attention with respect to your humanity. And I think that's what a big sort of point I took away from this is that there's something that's being addressed to you specifically by anything being mentioned. It's not just haphazardly being mentioned. There's a point there. That's why, as I mentioned with the use of the wow, by. It's directing your attention to something, pointing you towards something, making you consider something. Anyone else have any thoughts, questions, comments?
Especially the people who joined us for the first time, please don't be shy. This is a very welcoming circle of people. So please share your thoughts, questions. While waiting for others, maybe I can share one comment. Like, one thing attracted my attention in your presentation is that you taking Quran as speaking to you rather than being a book of, let's say, information. Like what happened to at that time, what happened to this person, rather than reading it as a, let's say, a historical text, you take it as a speech directed to you. And all your interpretations, like a fig, Mount Sinai, the olive, like I can see the people living in another century, your interpretation would be, for instance, irrelevant to them, let's say, because of the way they would take fig or olive would be completely different. But what I understand from your presentation is this is completely like right. This is what it's supposed to be, how it's supposed to be. Because I'm reading Quran to get guidance for myself. So whatever I read there, it's about me, myself. It's not about people live certain generations ago or later after me. So it's about me talking to me right in the moment. So I think that's a very interesting and valuable way of taking Quran. So I just wanted to highlight.
Yeah, it's to me that's sort of the, if it is his speech of the creator of the universe, it must be beyond time itself, and therefore addressing me specifically in my place, in my time. And I think that's, to me at least, how I try to read the Quran. And I think how when Nursi wrote those comments that I quoted, thinking the same way. I think Joe's hand was up first. I don't know if Birkan, you have to unmute them, but go ahead.
Hello, how are you, Suhail? Yeah, I just want to say, I think I'm actually appreciated so much when you said about humanness, bringing us closer to God. I've actually been going through that right now. I've been having a lot of physical pain, and I've been very, very despondent at some points. And yesterday I turned to God in my own way. Of course, I have those signs that you had mentioned, like God reveals, each of us have different signs that we could basically connect to. I'm not sure what everyone's is. I think I'm getting familiar with mine. Of course, I've been reaching out to them. And yesterday I actually took a drive and went to nature to kind of get some sort of connection. And I got a few of those signs, including this morning, something else happened. And, it makes it emotionally tolerable. The physical pain may still be there, but more emotionally tolerable. And I want to thank you very, very much. I appreciate you bringing that out and making that much more, available to me, that, it's actually real, and although I know it is, it's so reassuring to hear you this morning. Thank you, and all the best to you.
Oh no, you're welcome. I appreciate you saying that. I mean I think that's a very real aspect to the human being, what everybody goes through, and I'm sorry you're going through that. But to me, every sort of experience, even if it is pain or illness, or even health for that matter, any of those things, they're all simply just means to sort of connect back to Him, and they're all just signposts, so to speak. So while pain, I 100% agree with you. Nobody would desire pain or illness, but it's for that reason alone, by knowing that I have an illness, that I desire health. I don't want to be in pain. That's what draws me back to Him. And I think, as you said, that's what's reassuring, is that sort of I'm being acted upon. I'm being given this sort of illness to draw back to Him, sort of communication. And it's my choice whether I want to communicate to Him or not, whether I want to rely on Him and say that only He can provide me sort of what I desire, let's say health or well-being. So I appreciate it. Thank you. Sarah, I think you had your hand up as well. I don't know if Berkan, you can unmute Sarah.
Oh, I requested her to unmute. So if she wants to speak, she can unmute herself anytime she wants.
Assalamu alaikum. Sorry about that. So Jazakumullah khair. This is my first time with all of you, but not my first time with the methodology. So I really appreciate the presentation. And so I'll just comment on the things that really struck me as wonderful reminders. Is that I like the reminder that the verses are all connected, because sometimes they seem so unrelated from the first to the second. So I liked putting the words in one meaningful sentence, almost like one meaningful message. And it reminds me what, mashallah, Dr. Ali reminds us, that the universe also speaks in that way, words that are chained up together to make a meaningful message. So I was thinking about my life happenings as I was listening that seemed very disconnected and unjust. And this verse really walked me through the meaning of my own circumstance. So with that being said, I'll also move to the verses that were mentioned. So the lowest of the low, and then illa ladina amanu, like sometimes that feeling like that Joe mentioned, whether it's physically or emotionally, that lowest of the low, it feels so unjust. Like it feels like a paradox within, like, why am I feeling this when I'm made to want, health? Or why am I feeling this, injustice? Why is injustice happening to me when I'm made to love justice? And that lowest of the low occurred to me to be such a loving mercy through this presentation. It was such a reminder that it's actually such a just way to remind me in a very alarming way of the direction that I need to take, which was beautifully said in the next ayah, إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ. Yeah. So thank you so much for sharing that. I think that the way the beginning to end was mentioned was really cohesive and made a lot of sense. Alhamdulillah.
Yeah, I appreciate your comments. Yeah, I think as this chapter points out, these are things that every human being considers. I mean, it's unavoidable, really, because that's what you live with. That's who you are. Those life experiences that you go through every day, every moment, for that matter. And the question is, how do you make sense of them? that's what really makes you human. That's what distinguishes you, from my perspective, from you and the rest of the world, is how you can make sense of those things. In other words, by sense, by looking beyond the things themselves. So if I'm ill, or I'm in a precarious situation, or I'm in emotionally sort of turbulent states, or depressed or happy, doesn't matter really if you think about it. I mean, it does matter in the sense that nobody wants to be depressed, they want to be happy, but as a point of using that to go somewhere else, they all look beyond themselves. And I guess really when you think about it, it's the things that we don't like, that paradox is when we're most drawn to that, as you said, most just, because it's quite often in those moments that we turn back to how things really are. We sort of gain perspective about what the nature of the world really is, who we really are as human beings, that this world is transient, and man essentially isn't meant for this world in and of itself, but he's meant to connect, be in communication with, and rely upon and ask of his sort of permanent, eternal creator, his source of existence. I don't know, Berkan, how we're doing on time here, but and if anyone else had any sort of thoughts or comments.
We have still like 10 minutes. So
I think Faraz wrote a comment here. He says, would you say actually signs instead of just signs? The latter seems to imply they are just signs and not something better, more they could be just small point of expression about expression. Oh, okay. Okay, so I think you're saying about, the wording I'm using. Yeah, so I agree with you. Yeah, if I did use that, I apologize. But they are, I agree with you 100%, actual signs. In other words, they are things to be interpreted. If I understood what you're saying correctly. And something that I can sort of extract meaning and look to something else. That's what gives them importance and relevance to my life.
Asim, you can go ahead.
Okay, Assalamu alaikum. Wonderful, alhamdulillah. Thank you for that. I wanted to, bring back to when in the beginning of the slide you mentioned about the all just one, and then towards the verses at the end, it really highlighted what that, the balance or the justice is within the human being themselves. And like normally when you think of justice, it's never like, something always, with the, how would I say it, the desire for, like seeking, I would say, peace, or in yourself also. That would be something that it just comes with the seeking justice. But looking at the way with tying it to your spirit and your qualities, and going from the state of, being able to go to the highest form, and then, within, there's also that option of going into the lowest, which is within the human being themselves, and how that particular side is also ties to, the way the creation is then shows a little bit how the justice also is within ties to that. I mean, maybe you can clarify that a little bit for me also.
Yeah, I think if I understood you correctly, you correct me if I'm wrong, but yeah, it's justice is quite often thought about, and this is not to deny that, and it's important. Justice out there, and definitely man desires justice in the external world, but to me, as set out about trying to sort of understand this chapter, as you pointed out, there's a justice or judgment, a just judgment taking place within me as I see myself. In other words, I am made in such a way in which anything I do, or anything I think, or anything I feel, necessarily takes me back to my creator if I think about it. And the one and that's a just judgment that's been given to me, that's been put upon me. Sort of, I am sort of this judgment in a sense. But I can commit injustice. So in other words, Kareem, I think, asked earlier when he asked about hell lies within or resides within, I can commit an injustice to myself, not the one who is making me as I am, but it's me by my choice severing the connection, on destroying the balance within, and saying that, oh, my qualities, which desire and look towards eternity, they don't correspond to the world or even to my body. So I'm going to deny everything. I'm going to deny that, I am being bestowed, my qualities are being bestowed. I am being brought into existence. I am being taken care of. My existence is being guaranteed. I am being communicated with. Completely denying all of that simply because of the paradox, and not seeing that paradox is not on result, is not on account of things themselves. Things themselves have no idea about how you feel, essentially, when you think about it. It's not like, if you think about it, like a virus is saying, oh, I'm going to go out and get that human being. No, that's just, they're doing what they're doing. And it's what I don't like. It's my perspective. And the justice within me is knowing that in that experience, I am taken back to one who I'm in need of. What's more just than that is that I'm taken back to my source that I'm in need of for eternity. You can't, that there's nothing more just than that. There's no more just judgment than that. And I think that's something that sort of, I guess, often is neglected, is that the justice in our existence, how we're made. It's complete justice in a sense, because there's no way that we can deny the truth when one thinks about it. There's no one iota about possible if you really are reflecting upon it, thoughtful about it. But it's our choice about being unjust to ourselves. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
Jazakallah khairan, everyone. First and foremost, of course, our beloved presenter, Suhail, our friend. So I guess we can stop here if there are no other final remarks, concluding questions or comments. Again, thank you, everyone. Inshallah, we will start the next session at 1 p.m. If I'm wrong, if I'm misremembering, please correct me. We will start at 1 p.m. It will be another beautiful presentation by our beloved friend Faraz. So please stay with us. See you, inshallah, at 1 p.m.
Can I just close with dua? Is that possible?
Yes, please.
سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم وآخر دعواهم أن الحمد لله رب العالمين بحرمة سر سورة الفاتحة.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. See you at 1 p.m. inshallah.